Hey guys, Tarzan here, and today I'm making a quick updated guide video for my PvP and PvE talents. I've received a lot of messages in-game and on YouTube and Twitch asking why I run Guardian Affinity over Balance or over Feral, and I'm going to quickly go over that with you guys today. So, what you see now are my default talents specifically for 2v2 Arena. So I run Prosperity, Wild Charge, Guardian Affinity, Mighty Bash, Soul of the Forest, Stonebark, and Germination. For my PvP talents, I run Gladiator's Medallion, which is your trinket, Cyclone, Focus Growth, and Thorns. Now, Abundance, we're going to ignore that because you will never use that in PvP. It's not worth it. Don't even look at it. Now, some people have asked me why don't I use Cenarian Ward? Well, I'm running Soul of the Forest. So if you're going to run Soul of the Forest, Prosperity is, you definitely have to have Prosperity. It gives you 2 Swift Mends, plus if you're stacking Growth Trending, you can get some pretty juicy Swift Mends. I've tried running Cenarian Ward, and I just don't think the output is as strong as having a double Swift Mend. In the beginning of the expansion, a lot of people used to run Cenarian Ward with Cultivation, and at that time it worked great. I've tried a few matches, and against bursty teams, it just didn't seem as good as Prosperity and Soul of the Forest. Default, most Resto Druids, including the top tier rank 1 Druids, are running these PvE talents. The PvP ones are subject, but we'll go over that once we get to it. So again, Prosperity, definitely the way to go. For the second row, this is the one I get asked a lot. Why don't I use Tiger's Dash? Why do I use Wild Charge? I've put together a little 1-minute clip video, and I'm going to go over why I believe Wild Charge is the best of the 3. Check it out. Hey guys, so here I'm going to show you a few examples of me using Wild Charge to escape getting bursted down, to line up CC, and to juke a Windwalker Monk off of the edge. Now, let's go over each talent real quick. Renewal heals you for 30% with a 1.5 minute cooldown. With that long of a cooldown, you can do 6 Wild Charges. Tiger's Dash is a 45-second cooldown. In that duration of a cooldown, you can do 3 Wild Charges. Tiger's Dash is not that bad, but considering you can be gripped, charged, stunned, or snared in it, it's nowhere near as useful as Wild Charge. In Wild Charge, you can charge in bear form, leap in travel form, pounce in cat form, and out of form, you can leap to your partner. The uses are endless. It's way more beneficial. You can leap off edges. You can juke players so hard with Wild Charge. If you look at this example here, this Windwalker Monk is about to sap me. He's going to stun me, and he's going to start to burst me. You can see he doesn't have a port, so I jump off, juke him, leap back up, and there goes all of his burst, and he's running away. Hey guys, now that we've gone over why I use Wild Charge over Renewal and Tiger's Dash, let's briefly go over the next few rows. For the next tier, we have Balance Affinity, Feral Affinity, and Guardian Affinity. A lot lately I've been asked, do I run Feral Affinity? If so, when? I do not run Feral Affinity ever. I have tried it. For my playstyle, it just doesn't work. I've lost games trying Feral Affinity because I'm so used to having the passive of Guardian Affinity that when I tried Feral, it just wasn't worth it. Now, that's not to say that Feral Affinity is bad. It just does not suit my playstyle. With Guardian Affinity, you get a passive 6% damage reduction. You get Thrash, Iron Fur, and Frenzied Regeneration. So, Frenzied Regeneration heals you for 24% of your maximum health over 3 seconds while you're in bear form with a 30-second cooldown. You also get Thrash, which I think is sometimes underused and underrated. Thrash is a AoE swipe that applies a bleed. There have been so many games where I just spammed Thrash that I was able to get a rogue out of stealth, mage, hunter, druids. It is so useful. And also, let's say a rogue Cloak of Shadows, it's not going to take that bleed off. So let's say that a rogue's running from you and your partner CC'd and you're trying to Moonfire spam him, but he cloaks to try to get a re-stealth. All you gotta do is just thrash him, and it's going to apply a bleed to him. And you have Iron Fur, which increases your armor by 1100 for 7 seconds. And that's good to help mitigate some of that melee damage when you're being trained down. Now, Feral Affinity increases your movement speed by 15%. You also learn Rake, Rip, Ferocious Bite, and Swipe. Now let's say you want to try Feral Affinity, give it a go. This is what you need to do. Pick Feral Affinity. You're going to go to your PvP talents, and you're going to pick Master Shapeshifter. If you're running Feral Affinity, you pretty much have to run Master Shapeshifter. Because while you have Master Shapeshifter, you have a 25% damage increase in cat form. Now the way to burst with Feral Affinity, Master Shapeshifter, and cat form is to Innervate. Innervate gives you 12 seconds of energy-free casts while you're in cat form. So you can apply a lot of pressure that way. But the only way to get the full benefit of Feral Affinity is you constantly have to be going into melee range. You have to constantly try to keep your bleeds up. And the issue with that is, if you're constantly going in melee range, you open yourself up to get swapped to, which they may force a trinket, defensives. I just don't think it's worth it. And again, I'm not saying it's a bad choice. Just for me, it just does not suit my playstyle. Balance Affinity. It increases the range of all your abilities by 5 yards. You learn Moonkin Form, Star Surge, and Lunar Strike. Now, I use Balance Affinity now against any Spellcleave versus Guardian Affinity. When you're playing against a Spellcleave, having an extra 5 yards for your clones and your haunts is the best thing you can do. You shouldn't really need Guardian Affinity against a Spellcleave because you should be LOSing and playing max range to the best of your ability, and having that extra 5 yards to get clones off is really important. Against a melee cleave in 2s and 3s, I run Guardian Affinity every time. I will never run Balance against a melee cleave because if they swap to you, you're going to have a rough time staying alive. The next row is Mighty Bash, Mass Entanglement, and Typhoon. This is a pretty standard pick. It's going to be Mighty Bash 99.9% of the time. Now, some of you guys might say, well, I like Typhoon because I can knock them off on Blade's Edge Arena. Yeah, that's not bad, but here's the thing. With Mighty Bash, you can force a trinket, a defensive, you can peel for yourself. Typhoon is really not going to do much to save you, whereas Mighty Bash, you can force some type of cooldown or help yourself get away every time. Mass Entanglements, you're not going to use because almost every class has some immobilizing effect, and that'll just DR with it. Now, if you're playing Boomkin, then yeah, you'll want to run Mass Entanglement for root beams. But other than that, Mighty Bash is always the way to go. The next row, you have Soul of the Forest, Cultivation, and Incarnation Tree. I always run Soul of the Forest every single game in 2s and 3s, except for Rogue Mage 2v2 Arena specifically. Not 3s, but in 2s. So a Rogue Mage is pretty predictable, their opener, in my experience. You typically get in a fight a Fire Mage and either a Sub or Assassination Rogue. And 9 times out of 10, what they're going to do is, while you're in stealth, they're going to sap your partner. The Mage is going to come out of stealth and start casting Greater Pyro. I always bash to Greater Pyro because it probably will force a trinket. The Rogue is going to instantly blind you. What you need to do is trinket the blind, go Incarn, and start spamming Hots. Now, typically, as soon as you pop Incarn, the Mage is going to DB you, and he's going to try to ring a Frost you. It's important that you and your partner communicate how to stop that. Your partner has to stop the ring at all costs. Because when it comes to Rogue Mage, they don't want the game to go on. Because the longer the game goes on, the less likely they're going to win. So they're going to go all in, generally speaking, in the opener. You just need to survive that initial play. And communication with your partner is crucial. Now, when you're fighting Rogue Mage also, you want to be sure you're running a talent Overgrowth. But you don't want to use Overgrowth until the Mage Kleptos, because typically a Mage is going to wait for you to use Overgrowth, and then they're going to steal the Hots. Don't give them that opportunity. Be sure you save it for as long as possible. Cultivation. In the beginning of the expansion, Cultivation wasn't that bad. I've tried running Cultivation in Cenarian Ward, and the healing output, it's just nowhere near the level of Prosperity and Soul of the Forest, for my personal opinion. The next row, actually the next 2 rows are pretty standard. You're always going to run Stonebark, and you're always going to run Germination. Inner Peace, reduce cooldown of Tranquility by 60 seconds. It's not good for PvP. Spring Blossoms is also not good for PvP, specifically Arena. Photosynthesis, I've tried that. It just doesn't beat the benefit of having an extra rejuvenation. And Flourish, it's not worth a 1.5 minute cooldown for the effect. Most matches, especially quick matches, aren't going to last super long anyway. So these are my default talents: Prosperity, Wild Charge, Guardian Affinity, Mighty Bash, Soul of the Forest, Stonebark, and Germination. These PvE talents are my default for 2v2 and 3v3 arena. Now, let's go over my PvP talents. Standard, I always run the Gladiator's Medallion, Cyclone, Focus Growth, and Thorns. Now, Focus Growth, whether you're playing 2s or 3s, you will always run Focus Growth. With the buff it just got, it is so strong, you have to run it. Now, before the buff, versus melee and a healer in 2v2 specifically, I would use Revitalize instead of Focus Growth. For the past week, I have been comparing the healing output at the end of each match, rotating out Revitalize and Focus Growth. And Focus Growth is healing and saving me mana significantly more than the output of Revitalize. That's not to say that Revitalize is a bad choice, just Focus Growth is way stronger. Now, let's say we fight a Mistweaver Monk and a melee DPS in 2v2 arena. I typically no longer run Thorns, and I go to Master Shapeshifter. When you run Master Shapeshifter and Guardian Affinity, your chance to be critically hit by melee attacks is reduced by 20% while in bear form. That is so strong. I think it's underused and underrated. A lot of you guys might say, well, why don't you just Thorns to get them off you? Well, if they're craning, the crane damage and healing output is actually more than Thorns a lot of the time. And it's not necessarily going to save you consistently. And a lot of classes can counter Thorns now, especially when you get to higher rating. You have a Warrior who can Dispel Reflect Thorns. You have a Death Knight who can Magic Shell. If a Windwalker wants to push it, they can Karma you. It can be purged, it can be dispelled. There's just so many ways to get around Thorns now that a lot of players are recognizing that, and they're figuring out ways to deal with it. Versus Mistweaver Melee, there's a chance that when you Trinket, they're going to stun you, they're going to crane you, and they're going to burst you. In that situation, having the passive 20% additional crit reduction by melee with Master Shapeshifter, it's going to keep you alive. I've noticed a lot more versus Deckcon specifically when I read Master Shapeshifter. I didn't have the Trinket. I was really greedy with Barkskin. It just saved me so many cooldowns that I think it's worth using in 2v2 specifically. Now, we have a couple other decent talents. We have Nourish. So a lot of you guys have been asking me a lot about Nourish, and a lot of comments on my 2v2 video says, hey man, why don't you run Nourish? Is it because of the buffs? Well, even before the buffs, I was not running the Nourish talent. Now, Nourish is a very, very, very strong healing talent. The only issue I have is such a long cast time. What it does is it heals you for 27,000. It applies one missing hot. And if all of the hots are on the target, it critically heals. If you're playing against double melee or even a Mistweaver melee, running Nourish probably isn't good, because if they're tunneling you or if they swamp you or if they kick you, you're just not going to be able to heal yourself up. If you're relying on Nourish to keep your teammates up and they swamp to you, you're going to struggle and probably flop. Especially with the buffs that we got, being able to just spam hots and aggressively CC, I think is way more beneficial than Nourish. Now, in 3v3, especially since I'm running a Spell Cleave, Destro, Warlock, Shadow Priest, Resto Druid, I am using Nourish in 3s. In 3s, I'm typically running Cyclone, Nourish, and Focus Growth. I do swap out Nourish for Overgrowth when I'm fighting Mage teams and Hunter teams. Especially since Overgrowth got the mana cost reduced, it's actually been pretty beneficial to run it. Thorns, I sometimes use it in 3s now, but like I said, I'm noticing a lot more teams are able to counter Thorns, so I'm not getting, you know, the benefit out of it as much as I used to. More players are picking up on to look out for Thorns, stop hitting the target with Thorns, spell reflect the Thorns. Again, I just don't think it's necessarily as good as Overgrowth and Nourish. So for 2v2, I won't run Nourish unless I'm fighting probably a Shadow Priest. Because in 2v2, you want to be sure you're running Cyclone, Focus Growth, and Overgrowth. You need to have Overgrowth versus a Mage every game. so that when they klepto your partner, you can just instantly re-hot them back up. Having Nourish versus a mage, it's just not worth it, in my opinion. And let's see, Mark of the Wild. A couple of you have asked, hey, is Mark of the Wild any good? Honestly, I haven't really seen the big benefit or use out of it. I've tried it against Elemental Shamans. I noticed a slight difference, but I don't think Mark of the Wild will outweigh Overgrowth or even Nourish against Elemental Shaman. Now, let's go over my Azerite traits. A lot of you guys are asking, what Azerite traits am I stacking? Right now, I'm item level 392 equipped with 187,000 health. Now, I have all of the new Azerite pieces, so I have the extra row on each piece. So for my helmet, I have Grove Trending, which is for Swiftbend, and Waking Dream for Ysera's Gift. Grove Trending and Waking Dream are the two best Resto Druids, period. I don't think there's really much of a debate about that. If you look up any top tier rank 1 Resto Druid, that's pretty much what they're all stacking. My shoulders, I have Waking Dream and Rampant Growth. The reason I have Rampant Growth is because I did not have Grove Trending on my shoulders. And my chest piece, I have Grove Trending and Waking Dream. So I have 3 Waking Dreams, 2 Grove Trendings, and 1 Rampant Growth. If you use the add-on details, if you look at the end of each of your matches, Ysera's Gift is pretty high up there, especially since I'm running 3. I've noticed the numbers are pretty high. I'm kind of surprised, actually, how strong it is. So I would highly encourage you to be running Waking Dream and Grove Trending. If you don't have the new Azerite pieces, I would have 2 Grove Trendings and 1 Waking Dream. But once you do get the new tier of Azerite pieces, get one that has Grove Trending and Waking Dream as the option. Stat priority is going to be Haste, then Mastery. Crit and Verse are your 2 lowest. Verse being your lowest. Now, weapon enchant, you want to use Coastal Surge instead of Quick Navigation. Coastal Surge, the healing output, is well worth it. So definitely be sure you're using Coastal Surge. Another question I've been getting a lot is, what macros do I use? Can I go over my macros? Can I list my macros? I use very few macros. So I'll go over what I do have. I have if I hit Shift E, for example, let me share my character. If I hit Shift E, it'll self-innervate me. So that if I have somebody targeted I'm healing, Innervate won't just like not cast, it'll automatically apply to me. The only other macros I have are Focus CC macros. So on the right side of my screen, I have a Focused Entangling Roots, a Focused Wild Charge, a Focused Mighty Bash, and a Focused Cyclone macro. Those are the only macros that I do use. I've also been asked, how do I heal my party members? I actually manually click each party frame to heal. I know a lot of players have it bound. You see a lot of guys on stream and you ask them, hey, how do you heal your party? And they say they have a macroed and bound. If you're comfortable doing that, go for it. I'm not. I've been playing this specific character since vanilla, and I've always been able to manually select each frame. Fine. It hasn't cost me any games. I haven't lost because of it. It's just what I'm comfortable with. Now, all of my spells are bound so that when I do select a frame, it's still instant. It's like, quick, it's going. Now, guys, remember, just because you see some Sea-Doo, for example, rank 1 player, and he's saying, well, yeah, you know, I have all my party frames bound, I run this talent, this is, you know, this works great. Just because they're running those talents, it doesn't mean that's going to be the best for you, because you got to realize, a lot of guys like to say, well, I watch these rank 1 players, they're running this and it works great. You got to realize that's a different breed of player, and they're all playing at a skill level that you're not necessarily going to find in looking for group and pugging players. It's trial and error. You got to run what talents work best for you, what help you survive, and what worked with your team. And don't expect to go into arena and win every match. You will lose. You will not win every match. Even the top players, they lose a lot. You cannot expect to win every match. What you need to do is play and learn from your mistakes. Find somebody you like playing with, and even if you guys lose a lot, just keep playing and working on it and communicating and figuring out, well, why are we dying? What are we losing? What can we do different? That's how you learn. Now, let me end this video off with a little disclaimer. I do not claim to be rank 1. I do not claim to be your top tier. Everything in this video is from my personal perspective and playstyle. You may find another druid who may say something completely different, and that's great. That's how he plays. But this is how I play. This is what I feel is the best for my play style, and I feel pretty comfortable saying that. If you guys have any questions at all, or something I didn't cover in the video, something you have clarification of, maybe you don't agree with something, feel free to share in the comments, send me a message on Twitch, in-game, and I'll try to answer it the best I can. I appreciate you guys watching my videos, and I'll have a lot more content coming out here in the near future. Thanks.